Okay, guys, are you ready? I'm so excited for this topic. So first, the shiur is dedicated to Leilui Nishmat Eliza Bat Yitzchak and Shimon Ben Esther, and for the Refuah Shalema of Eve Meir Ben Einun and Asnet Bat Atir Tzemar Busha Chaya. Bezrat Hashem, may they have Refuah Shalema, Refuat HaNefesh, Refuat HaGuf, and easy birth for Leah Bat Yael. So a few things happening before I start the class, just so that you know. There's an event next week, the Chalabik. If you guys didn't get your tickets, it's on it's on my Facebook, should be on the Lighthouse page, and also on the WhatsApp group. So definitely make sure you do that so that we can, make sure we have enough materials for everyone. That's number one. Then we had another event. There's a girl here, Raquel. She's not here right now, but she usually comes to the shulim, and she has the. It's an event for singles. It's a virtual event. I believe it's called Corona Crush, something like that. It's on my Instagram, also on my page. So I can share that with you also on the WhatsApp group. So make sure to check it out so that we can find your shiduchim. Okay, yes, just wanted to mention that. Okay, so I want to mention that the shiur on Shlom Bayit is not relevant to people who are in physically or verbally abusive relationships. That's important to note because it takes a lot more than a shiur to resolve that conflict. So, if somebody's in an abusive or physically abusive or verbally abusive relationship, it's very, very important to, seek therapy and, get the right professional help because, shiurim are not gonna, help the cause. This is really for the average couple and also the average person that's, in a relationship right now. So I just wanted to put that out there. So we have to understand that a relationship is a very, very complicated web of a lot of factors that contribute to its well-being. So that can either be, physiological, biological, it can even be genetic, everybody's made up of different things. And so, while I'm going to try to touch on everything, there's a lot of parts to relationships. I'm going to try to cover the basics today, and then we'll go to part 2, part 3, because there's really so much to know. And also the center of our lives are our relationships, not just between husband and wife, but, our relationships with each other. It's the center of our well-being. It's the center of our health, of our happiness, of everything is relationships. So I'm going to try to cover everything today, but there are a lot of things that I want to kind of, go more in detail later on throughout the other shiurim. So there's a story of a guy who got engaged, and he has a friend he's been married for a long time. And he says, listen, congratulations, I hear you're getting married soon, and, it's such a nice time and such a simcha, but I have to warn you about one thing. So he says, yeah, please, let me know, what's going on. So he says, the first 8 years of marriage is very difficult. So he looks at him and he goes, what do you mean? He goes, listen, you're not going to have the best intimacy. The kids come. It's hard to communicate. You don't really have the spark here and there. The wife gets tired. He's like telling him all of these things. And he said, yeah, it's really tough. So he says, wow, thank you so much for letting me know. It's so nice that an older guy with so much experience is telling me about marriage. And the guy goes, so obviously the one that's getting married, he tells the married guy, so obviously after 8 years, it gets better, right? He goes, well, I don't know about that because I've only been married 8 years. So it's to show, some people think it's going to get better. And sometimes, the getting better is just up to us to make that happen. Sometimes we're comparing other relationships and we think, okay, this is like what a relationship is. This is what love is. But at the end of the day, it's really up to us to make the relationship work. It's up to us to make those first 8 years great and not just mediocre, right? So the guy's giving him his advice, but everyone's different. For me, when I first got married, they were like, the first year is horrendous. It's like the hardest year ever. And for me, Baruch Hashem, it was the easiest. For somebody else, it was the hardest. And then it got easier and vice versa. So we never really know. It's really up to each one of us to learn to work on ourselves from the very, very beginning of marriage until B'ezrat Hashem, the very end. But it's very important that you know that it's just constant work. And, you know, one person's advice doesn't always apply to every person's relationship, right? Everyone's very different. So in today's world, it's become increasingly difficult to sustain not only a relationship, but especially a marriage. And while it has to do with a lot of factors, the main, you know, concern is that in this generation, you know, there are a lot of things that affect our relationship in a very negative way. But the first thing really is that we're so different. Men and women are so different. And because we don't understand our differences, that's why we have so many issues. So men and women they have major biological differences, they have major physical differences, and they have major mental differences. So what could be for, you know, a situation that looks, you know, somewhat right or good in a woman's eyes, in a man's eyes, it could look hectic, right? So everybody has their own view of how life is, and men and women, because they're so different, even biologically, their reality is completely different. And our responsibility is really to understand the differences between us. So the first question is, why did Hashem make us so different? You know, it's like Hashem knows, okay, we have unity between men and women. Why did he make us so different that it's so difficult to get along with the other person? You can literally be the perfect person, the perfect wife, perfect husband, but you're always going to find differences. You're always going to argue about the smaller things, even if you're working on yourself, because we just see life differently. And so, you know, the question arises, why would Hashem make us so different that we're fighting all the time? Why is it a constant battle all the time? Why is it something that we're constantly learning? So I'll go back to that question, but essentially that's the first question. And I want to give you an example of how different we think. So when Purim comes, what's the first thing that a woman thinks? Oh my gosh, I need to make a list of who's getting the mishpach manot. What color bows am I going to use? What snacks are going to be in the mishpach manot? How many bambas do I put? How many Snicker bars? Like, should I make it healthy? You're like going into like a whole rabbit hole. Your husband does not even think an ounce of that. He just thinks, how much is this going to cost me? Right? So it's completely, you can see like the reality is Purim is coming. We have to have mishpach manot, but the woman thinks completely different than the man. The man says, okay, let's like not send this to the whole world. Like let's send mishpach manot to like 2-3 friends. And you're like, absolutely not. Like that's horrible. Like we have to send it to like the whole community. And then your husband starts freaking out. Like, what do you mean? But like, how much is each mishpach manot? Right? So the husband thinks so differently than the woman, and they can already start getting in an argument. What do you mean? We need to send to the whole community. And the husband says, yeah, but like we're not billionaires, so we can't like, you know, start sending out mishpach manot to everyone, right? We can't invest in so many bambas and bislis when it's like we have to pay for our kids' school. So that's just one example of how we think so differently, and that's such a small topic. So imagine about the bigger challenges in life. The man is also very narrow-minded, and they usually have one focus, which is financial. All they're thinking about is how much money am I making this month? Am I going to be able to pay the bills? Am I going to be able to pay my kids' schools, to pay, you know, the health bills, whatever it is, you know, they're always thinking financially and how am I going to be the breadwinner of the house? The woman's thinking, how am I going to paint my son's room? Is it going to be green? Is it going to be blue? She's not thinking, how much is the paint going to cost? Right? So understanding those differences already help us kind of, you know, understand that men are completely different, and that if we do understand that there's like a financial aspect to things, and if we change our brain to say, hey, okay, you know, I'm going to send mishpach manot, but maybe, you know, I don't want my husband to freak out. So let's like narrow it down to 5 people instead of 15. So it's all about learning and understanding that we have differences, and then kind of, you know, pushing yourself to grow together with those differences. It's not about changing the other person, because they're never going to change. That's just how men think. It's not about telling him, no, this is how you need to think. Think about what color bow is going to be on mishpach manot. They're just never going to think that way. So we have to, number one, accept that there are differences, and number two, know how to deal with the differences. That's essentially what a relationship is. Another example is when a woman sees another woman on the street. So what she'll think essentially is, wow, I really like what she's wearing. Oh my God, her hair is so beautiful. She has such a confidence about her. It's so amazing, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of look at her in admiration. But when a man looks at a pretty woman, they have such a big yetzer hara that they're not thinking the same things as us, right? They're thinking about her beauty. They're thinking things externally. They're thinking things are even sexual. So we don't see things the same way in any aspect, it's whether it's, a situation, or whether, an event, whatever it is, the husband's always thinking something differently than you. So if you think you can read your husband's mind, think again, because they're really, really completely different than us. So now the problem is not entirely just related to our differences, but it's also the fact that, going back to what I was saying about this generation, is that there are a lot of things that trigger the Yetzer Hara even more. We already have a Yetzer Hara, but now there are more things pushing our Yetzer Hara to be stronger. And what does that mean? For example, if a woman's walking on the street, because the women today dress a little bit more provocatively and they, want to attract attention for whatever reason, we have men, trying to cover their eyes, but it's much harder when the woman's dressed provocatively. So back then, women used to wear, bigger dresses, they wore long sleeve, and now it's like they barely even wear a bathing suit, and that's called like an outfit. So we have the crop tops. It's like very in now in Zara. So it's very like pushed upon, this kind of trend that, it seems normal, it seems okay, but it's much harder for a man, no matter how religious he is, to watch his eyes when a woman is walking in shorts and a tank top. So we live in a generation where that's a huge concern, because, while the husband wants to be religious, he wants to watch his eyes, the Yetzer Hara is becoming even stronger in this generation. Now, another thing about that is that men are also taught the wrong things about what a woman should be, because it's not only about if he's, driving in his car and he sees a billboard or he sees a magazine or whatever it is. It's also about Instagram. Everybody has Instagram these days, whether you're religious or not, you have Instagram. And, whether if it's for work or, whatever your excuse is that you really need to have Instagram to socialize with the world, at the end of the day, you're still going to come across ads of women, dressing a certain way, or, it's like now these days sex sells with everything. So, if there's a perfume commercial, it's like a woman half naked. I'm like, what does that have to do with the perfume? Like how does that help us understand like what the smell of the perfume is, Like if the perfume smells like flowers, take an ad of a flower, not of a naked woman, right? So it doesn't make sense to me. But at the end of the day, it's the fact that they're pushing this agenda on everyone, and it's very, very hard to look away, because they're playing with the impulses that we all have, right? And so we have to understand that in today's world, that's why there's such a high divorce rate, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And it's so difficult to build a relationship that's based on trust and based on faith, because we're constantly being pushed this agenda that a woman needs to look a certain way. And now forget about the man. Now think about the woman, about us. We look on Instagram and we want to dress modestly, and, we want to look good, but okay, after birth, your body is not the same. And after the second birth, it's the same. I mean, I don't know, I'm going to have a second birth soon, but your body's not the same. I'm sure, most women who already gave birth a few times can tell you that. And so the husband has to compare someone who went through a few births to somebody who he sees on a magazine, wherever he goes, or on a billboard or on Instagram or whatever it is. He's comparing his wife to that, right? And so that's why when we say it's very important that in the relationship, there is religion. It's for a certain purpose, because you want your husband to watch his eyes. You don't want him scrolling through Instagram and having, all these models that he's following. Sometimes when there's an ad here and there, there's nothing you could do. But usually it's very, very important that, we keep this distance between, the world of celebrities and the world of media and, what's in our home. Because at the end of the day, we are what we surround ourselves with. We are what we consume, whether that's the media, newspaper, whatever it is. It's like when the Surfside collapse happened and they had, all the death count every single day, I was like glued to the news, and it really like affected me negatively. And, it's a known thing that people who are glued to the TV and they're always like looking at negative things because the news is mostly negative, they'll have this like negative energy about them. So it's very important, the things that we consume, it's very important to understand that they affect us very, very heavily. And sometimes we don't realize that, but they do. We'll be scrolling all day. Number one, we don't realize that it's an addiction. But number two, we see these things that we're like, oh, whatever, it doesn't bother me, but it actually deep down could unconsciously, change how we think. So that was a very important point to mention, because we are not living in a world where it's very easy to build a strong relationship and a strong foundation. but the point is that, we have these delusional standards of how a man needs to be and how a woman needs to be. And sometimes that causes the woman to, lose her self-esteem, lose her confidence, because she doesn't look like the woman in the magazine. And the woman in the magazine doesn't even look like the woman in the magazine, just by the way, because there's Photoshop and, they can fix her face here and there. I remember one time there was a girl, I don't know, that I met, I think it was like on Instagram. She messaged me something, and then we ended up meeting in person, and I literally couldn't recognize her. I didn't know that it was her. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, we met, I think, for coffee or something. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't recognize you. Not in like a negative way, just, with the filters today and the things that you can alter, the people that we see in person are not the same. It's to show you like how different the media is versus reality, right? So it's very important that we make that distinction, and that we don't rely on those standards to build our home and to build our self-esteem, etc. So that was part one. Another part of relationships is that it's constant learning, and it's constant work. So if you think that that's it, I got a ring on my finger, I'm good, like for the rest of my life, you are wrong. So, a lot of people, so we go through different levels and challenges in life. So before we get married, we're like, we're thinking about, we have to get married, we have to find a husband. Then you get married, and there's a whole other wave of challenges, which is, how to keep the flame, and how to, have taharat mishpacha, family purity, and how to make sure that, you have a good relationship. And then the kids come, which is a whole other thing, and it's finding time to handle the kids, and your challenges with stress, and then how to deal with your husband. So all of these things come at a time, but at the end of the day, we're constantly learning and evolving together. That's very important to know, because some people think, it's just like, I'm just going to work on myself and that's it. And, it doesn't matter what my husband thinks or the other side, but we have to make sure that we're growing together, and that it's not like we're living separate lives. So when you're dating someone and that leads to marriage, hopefully that leads to marriage, you have a lifetime to learn about the other side. So you're going to learn things like, what are his pet peeves? There are some things that you're so used to doing all the time, it's out of habit, and he hates it. And you're like, but I've been doing that since I was like 3 years old, and you have to change it because he just can't stand it, right? So there are things that I'm like, okay, just accept the way I am. But then it's like, that's the ego talking. And then it's like, okay, maybe I should care about what my husband thinks. And maybe if it really bothers him, maybe I can work on that, right? So just knowing that we have to constantly learn about each other, and learn, what the other person hates or doesn't like, et cetera, that can help us build a better relationship. So just accepting and knowing that we're just constantly learning. A perfect example is, and this is a big challenge with a lot of relationships, is that some women, when they got married, and let's say they're both not religious, and then she starts watching Shiurei Torah. And after a few weeks, she really starts really believing in Hashem, and she really wants to, become a lot more religious. And she decides to do, I want to keep Nida now. I want to keep Taharat HaMishpacha. I want to cover my hair, etc. So now what happens if the husband doesn't keep kosher, and he doesn't keep Shabbat, and he doesn't want her to cover her hair? That creates a lot of tension between the husband and wife, because the wife wants to cover her hair, but then the husband doesn't. So he's like, where do we go from here? Because the wife is growing, then the husband's growing in his own way. So then how do you handle that situation? And so we have to understand that when we're growing together, there are times where we have to sacrifice things. So while it is the right thing that you want to cover your hair and you want to do tshuva, etc., you have to also be in agreement with your husband about certain things. And there's a way to confront them about things. So it's not like, okay, I'm covering my hair, let's deal with it. I'm going to buy a wig tomorrow, a $3,000 wig. It'll kill you. But no, if you tell him, I want to cover my hair, and I want to wear a wig, and you just say it like that, and you start doing it without asking him for permission, then that's a whole different ballgame versus, hey, can we sit down? I know that you're seeing that I'm following these Shiurei Torah. Do you mind if we watch a shiur together? Maybe you'll like it too. And then slowly warm him up to the idea that, you're starting to really get stronger with Hashem, and kind of, get him involved in your journey as well, because that's really the only way to do it. Or else it's my way or the highway, and then that's where tensions build up. So it's very important that when you grow, you have to grow with your husband. You have to involve him in everything that you do, because if you don't involve him, then he's going to feel left out. He's going to feel like you don't respect his opinion and that you don't care. And it's all, and it's amazing. And it's a big zchut to be all about Hashem and growing, and it's amazing. But at the end of the day, when you're married, it's not between just you and Hashem or just you and your husband. It's you, your husband, and Hashem. And so you have to make sure that all of those factors are involved in whatever decision that you make. And so, of course, if you want to take on covering your hair, keeping Shabbat, keeping more strictly kosher, definitely speak to a rabbi and see how you can make it work with your husband. But it's also up to you to be able to handle that situation in a way where you communicate the right way, and you say it very gently, and you respect his opinion, and you talk about it. Because if you don't talk about it and you suddenly just, I'm keeping Shabbat next week, it's like, whoa, like what just happened? You just, flipped 180. So it's very, very important that, number one, we know that we're constantly learning, but that we're also able to just evolve together. It's very, very important. So another example, when we look at relationships and we realize that it's the center of our well-being, then we're able to focus more on our relationships versus other things. Because sometimes there are other things that are involved in our lives, and then we neglect our husband sometimes. So for example, when you have kids and they come home from school and they had a really bad day, so you're like, what happened, my love? Is everything okay? And they're crying and they're angry. They're throwing their food. You're not going to be like, oh my God, I can't stand you, and close the door. You're going to sit with them. What happened, my love? Did someone bully you at school? You're going to handle it in a very gentle way. But when it's your boyfriend or your fiance or your husband that comes from work and he's pissed, you're going to be like, why are you angry? You're always angry all the time. What happened at work? You're much less gentle about it, because it's a partnership, right? It's not like your kids that they're like, oh, they're so cute and they're victims, etc., etc. So when you look and you see that your husband comes home and he's angry, if you handle it the same way that you handle it with your children, you're more gentle, and you're like, okay, let's talk about it first. Let's have dinner, because when someone's hungry, they are angry. So you want to make sure that you handle that with a lot of love, just like you do with your children. It's the same thing at work. The way you talk to your boss, if you're pissed, you're going to be very gentle, and you're going to be calm, and you're going to hold yourself, because work has become a priority, and it's important for you that you have that relationship with your boss, or you have that relationship with your kids. And so in the same way, you have to be just as gentle and just as focused on your relationship, because it's the center of your well-being. So, your kids grow up, they go to college, and they leave you. They get married and they leave you. They don't forget about you. They'll call you once in a while. But what I mean is that your husband is your partner for life, meaning that, the kids go away, work, sometimes it changes. And so sometimes we forget that we have to invest just as much, if not more, on our spouses than just work or just kids. And we have to be just as gentle with them, because at the end of the day, it is a relationship, and they're just as sensitive, and we need to respect them even more than the people around us that are strangers, or they're our bosses, or they're our friends. So it's very important that we know that, number one, relationships is the center of our well-being. And number two, that we need to spend a little bit more time, not forgetting our husband sometimes, and, taking that step forward and being a little bit more gentle, and knowing how to handle when things get crazy. So I think I skipped this part. When you marry someone under the chuppah, it's considered your soulmate, by the way. So if you reach that point where you passed all the stress of the marriage and all the stress of the engagement and all of the organization, and you're under the chuppah, it's known that Hashem said, okay, this is your soulmate. You've gotten under the chuppah. This is one of your mazalot. You usually have 7 in your whole life. So this means that when you marry somebody under the chuppah, it's very important that you know that it's your soulmate and you become one. So what that means is that that person, no matter how much they bother you or how much they're your opposite, they're meant to complete you. And so if it's, for example, someone that makes you really angry or someone that makes you overwhelmed, then it shows that that person wants, that Hashem wants you to work on your anger, or he wants you to work on managing stressful situations. Whatever it is that you feel is so difficult to work on with your husband is actually your type of work. It's meant to work together. They're meant to complete you. So if there's something, for example, that I do all the time that really bothers my husband and he's not able to, manage it or handle it, then I'm like, this is your tikkun. This is something that you need to work on. And so when we realize that we're trying to achieve completion and we're soulmates, meaning we're one soul, so everything that we do affect each other, then we realize that we're really just constantly growing together, and we're doing it together. It's not like one person decides that he's going to do one thing one day and then leaves the person out. So it's very important that you know that we're just one soul, we're one unit, and that everything needs to happen together and not on separate journeys. And this is my favorite part. So this is another part of the relationship, and it's setting the ego aside. This is a very hard one, because we all have pride and we all have, our differences, and we all want to say, yeah, we're right. And I don't care how many times, he apologizes, I was always right, blah, blah, blah. And we always wait for that other person to apologize. It's very important that we learn how to set our pride aside. So when your husband comes home from work, right, and all you're thinking about is, I can't wait to tell him how he didn't clean the dishes last night, and I'm so pissed, right? So when he comes home, that's like the last thing you want to do, because he's probably stressed from work and he just wants to come home and like eat because he's probably starving. And you're like, I just don't understand. You think I have nothing to do all day, and I was cleaning the house all day yesterday, and all you had to do was do the dishes, and I even cooked for you, blah, 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 right? It goes on and on and on. It's very important that, number one, we put our pride aside and realize that it's not just about being right and being like, oh, I do this all day and you do that. It's really just about choosing your battles, number one, because there are so many bigger issues in life and bigger issues in marriage that the little things like cleaning the dishes, just like take a deep breath and be like, it's fine, I'll do it. I mean, for me, it's therapeutic, so I love doing it. But I know other people who'd be like, this is ridiculous. Like, I cook all day and he can't even like clean 2 plates. So it's very important that sometimes, it's not all about, I want to be respected in this house. I want to be this, I want to be that. It's not only about you. You're also, if your husband's going through a really hard time during the week and all you're thinking about was the fact that he didn't clean 2 dishes, there's a problem here. And the problem is not him. It might be you, right? And so a lot of people have a really hard time understanding that because they're always pointing fingers. And that's a big problem in a relationship because we always think that we're right and that's all we care about, right? We care about the fact that, we do all this work and we spend all this time and energy, and we think that our work is more important than our husband's work, right? But while it is important, we raise our kids and, we create a home, which means that, we have the right education, we make sure that we have the right atmosphere in the home. It's really a lot of work. It's not just like, oh, like, let's put some nice music. It's really a lot of work to be a woman, but it's also a lot of work to be a man. It's a lot of work to go to work every single day and battle, whatever calls and meetings and hard people that you have to deal with all day. And at the end of the day, bring in the right amount of money so that, your kids are not on the street, God forbid. And so they have so much stress, but it's a different kind of stress. And so when they get home, the last thing they want to hear is that they didn't do 2 dishes. They want to hear, hey, honey, how was work? Everything was good? Okay, why didn't you clean the dishes? No, I'm kidding. Don't say that. But really there's a time and place. There's really a time and place, and you'll learn that there are times where you don't bring up things like that. And there are times where you can be like, hey, can we talk about this? It's really a lot about the timing. So there's a known theory in psychology that if I tell you right now, look for a red item in the room, and you look around, you're going to find the red item, but while you're scanning, you're going to miss the other items because you're so focused on the task at hand. And so if I say, look for a red ball, and while you're scanning, there's a green ball, you're going to totally miss the green ball, right? Because you're focusing and you're investing all of your energy and your cognitive resources on finding the red ball, right? So you miss a lot of things that you were supposed to look for. So they tell you find the red ball, and it's like, did you see a green ball? While you were scanning, you'll be like 100% no, but it was actually there the whole time. It's actually a crazy. It's called the gorilla experiment. I don't know if you guys can look it up after, but it's a very cool experiment where there's people playing basketball, and then they're like, did you see the gorilla? And you were so focused on how many times the ball bounced, because they tell you that's the task at hand, that you don't notice a gorilla passing by. It's literally insane. Because I studied psychology, so I remember I was watching it. I was like, there's literally no gorilla. And they were like, yes, there is. And then they back up in the video and you see it's like unbelievable. So it's to show you sometimes we're really, it's very, very important where our cognitive resources lie. And in the same way that we can only focus on the red ball and filter out everything else, we can do the same thing in our relationships and in our lives in general. And what I mean by that is, if you focus on the red ball, and let's say that's positivity, then you're going to filter out everything that's negative, and you're not even going to notice it, because you're training your brain to focus all of its resources on positivity and on thinking of the positive and looking at the good side of things, especially when it comes to relationships and especially when it comes to your husband. Because if he comes home and he's stressed and all you're thinking about is what he didn't do, versus like, wow, like he's really stressed, like he's probably just like worried about how he's gonna bring money home, and he's so worried about his kids and his family. That's one way to look at it, right? Which is the red ball, the good way. Or you can filter out the negative stuff and not focus on the right things and say, he didn't help me yesterday and I just don't understand. And so when you take the negativity and then your husband comes home and all you tell him is you did this and you did that and everything was negative, then you're already building negative energy in your home. And what does that affect? Who does that affect? Your husband. It can affect, God willing, when you'll have kids or when you have kids, and it affects you because you're not happy. And so when you look at something positive and you say, okay, I'll just let go of what he did yesterday, letting go of the ego and letting go of our pride, then you start to build this positivity and you start to kind of, let the ego like chill a little bit on the side. And that's very, very important because it's such small things in the grand scheme of everything. When your husband is going to work and he's really working so hard and it's like a wave of just a crisis for him, and you don't know what he's going through, and all you're worried about is the little things, that he didn't put the kids to bed and you're tired. Of course, it's validated. Of course, it's justified that you're tired. But at the end of the day, it is a partnership. And if you see that if he's going through a really hard time and you can handle the stress and you can, let him unload and take the burdens off his shoulders by, making him a really nice dinner and speaking to him about work and, letting him kind of like vent to you, then that's a way better reaction than, oh my gosh, I can't believe, you didn't help me with the kids. I'm so tired and I'm pregnant and he didn't go to sleep at the right time, et cetera, because he's not thinking about those things. And when we understand that there are gender differences and we understand that they have a certain responsibility in the relationship and that they're not thinking about those things, then we start to build a much better foundation, especially when you put pride aside. Because when you're fighting with your husband, sometimes you're only worried about being right. And so there's a quote, you can win or you can be happy. And so there are some relationships that it's all about winning for the husband and the wife. They're constantly arguing. And it's just, okay, yes, I win. What did you get out of that win? What did you get? Okay, you got, a few points on your, you pat your shoulder and you got a few points there on your ego, but what does that really solve? When we focus more on being happy and making your partner happy versus just being right in a certain situation, then that's where you start to build a foundation, because there are times where you're going to be right and he's still going to think he's right. There are times where we just both think that we're right. Marriage is not black and white. There's always a gray area. And it's like, for example, when the first year that I got married to my husband, I said as a joke, I was like, oh, shut up. And he was like, what? And like me growing up, I always said, shut up, like to my siblings. I'd be like, oh, you're so annoying. Like, shut up. It was such a normal thing for us. And for him, he was like, what did you just say? you know, and it wasn't like in a threatening way. He was just like, that's so, you know, you usually don't talk like that. And so for him growing up, it was such a big like disrespect to say shut up. You would more likely say like be quiet, you know. And so I learned right away. I'm like, okay, like I'll never say that again, you know, because it's not about being right. Because for me, I grew up saying shut up, so for me it was okay. Like it wasn't like a big deal. But for him, it was like, no, 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 you can't say shut up to your spouse, you know. So it's so interesting that everyone has different rights and wrongs. And so again, it's not about being right. It's just about, you know, being happy with your partner and sometimes letting go of the things that to you might seem right, but to him are wrong. There's also another quote. So I wish I could like paint this and have this on every married person's wall, but it's, do you want to be right or do you want to be loved? Because it's two different things. Sometimes you just want to be right, and then, you know, you fight for, there are some couples who fight for weeks and they will literally like sleep in different beds because, you know, the husband didn't put the kids to sleep, or, you know, he came home late and you were supposed to have date night. Like these small things that to some people it seems big, but on the grand scheme of things it's not. And so, you know, you're all like, you know, pissed off, he's pissed off, you're both unhappy, and for what? Because you didn't put the ego aside and you only care about being right and not about being loved and trying to help the situation. So it's important that we learn to put the pride aside, and that, you know, that we want to be loved and we want to be also right. But, you know, you choose in every challenge that you have. You choose whether you want to be, I told you, I feel like this is going to come off in a second. You choose whether you want to be right or whether you want to be happy. So every challenge is different. Now, again, there are things that are very important to you in your life that you might really want to stand your ground and be like, I don't care, this is really important for me. And then you can, you know, learn to talk about it and, you know, explain to them the situation and why you really feel like you're right. And that could be not because you want to be right, just because you want to, you know, you don't want that situation to happen again. And that's totally okay. But you have to learn when you want to be right or when you want to just really like let go of the ego and be like, okay, like, you know, I'll give up this time. Another very, very important aspect of relationships is, the biggest aspect of relationships is that you want to build an emotional bond. Gary Newman, who's a psychologist, he's actually hilarious, right? He talks about how to parent, but he also talks about relationships. And he says, in a happy marriage, you need to have at least 30 minutes a day of uninterrupted quality time. And what that means is not, hey, babe, let's go for a movie and then not talk for 2 hours and just watch a screen. It doesn't mean, you know, scrolling through Instagram and here and there, you know, pass me the water, pass me the chicken. It's really like no phone, no kids, no phone calls, no TV, no Netflix. It's uninterrupted time, face to face, undivided attention. And he says this because it was actually a research that mentioned that happily married couples all said that they had at least 30 minutes a day of uninterrupted time to just focus on their bond. And now we're talking about an emotional bond, because physical bond anybody can have with anyone, right? You're just attracted to someone and, you know, things can happen physically, but emotionally it's very hard to build a bond. It takes years, right? It takes years to build trust and to build a foundation and to build someone that, you know, really knows you inside and out. Statistically speaking, those people who were unhappily married, they spent almost 0 to less than 30 minutes of, you know, uninterrupted time with their husband. But also, you know, for them, it was their quality time was watching Netflix together. And that, I do that all the time. And I think that's quality time. My husband's like, no, that's not quality time. Like, I'm like, yeah, but we have to watch How to Get Away with Murder. And he's like, but let's talk about like today. I'm like, but I'm so tired. Like, I just want to watch a show. So sometimes that happens, you know, I feel like 30 minutes of uninterrupted time every day is hard because you want to, you know, you want to be able to get things done. And sometimes you just need your space. So I personally think it's hard every single day, you know, uninterrupted time, at least 30 minutes. If you can't do that, you don't need like a timer. Oh my God, 30 minutes. You can do 25 minutes, 20 minutes, but make sure that you're constantly building that emotional bond and that it doesn't just, you know, kind of like disintegrate and then it just like ends up being like dinner, everybody goes to their computer, good night, you know, because that can happen. It gets into a habit and then everybody, you know, goes into their space and then we forget that we're living with someone else and that person has their needs and their concerns. So I remember also when I got married, somebody told me, they gave me really good advice, and they said, before you marry someone, remember that you have to build not a romantic relationship, but a friendship, because friends last much longer than, relationships come and go. Friendships also come and go, but when you build a friendship, you get to know someone on a much deeper level. A romantic level, especially in this generation, is just, going on a date and having our first kiss. It's surface level. We want deep level. And by building a strong emotional bond and having that uninterrupted 30 minutes, it means that you're getting to know what are their biggest fears. Why is it that their pet peeve is this? Are you traumatized? Were you traumatized when you were little? What are your biggest challenges right now? What are you dealing with? Is there anything that I can help you with? What do you think religiously if we start doing this? You start to build this like depth with your husband that actually, by the way, helps eliminate a lot of, Shem Yishmael, God forbid, but there's a lot of cheating going on. And usually that happens when there's no strong emotional attachment to the person. And so a lot of people forget that, in the middle of their marriage, they forget to continue that emotional bond. And so it starts to disintegrate, and then it becomes just physical. And what happens? The husband also can get sick of that and says, I can get physical anywhere else I want. So why stay with that person? And that can happen with the woman too, by the way. So, it's not just men who cheat, there are also women who cheat, but really you're much less likely to cheat when you have a very strong emotional connection with someone. And that's just because they know you so well inside and out, and it's so hard to build that bond. It takes so much energy and investment that they're a lot less likely to cheat because they just have so much to lose. So it's very important to know also, you want to get to know your husband on a deep level. Another very, very important thing is you want to go on dates. Like once a week, you want to have date night, whether that's Monday, Tuesday, you choose whatever day. And if sometimes it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But really choose a day where it's like Taco Tuesdays. I don't know, we used to do that. But, we need to just make like a dedicated time so that we don't forget that, we have a partner in this life, and that, we want to make sure that we have that quality time with them. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. Another thing. Okay. This is what I was going to say. And this is what Gary Newman said, he's a psychologist. When you go on a date, there are 3 things you don't talk about. It's going to be really hard, but do not talk about money. Do not talk about work. And if you have kids, do not talk about kids. Now I'm thinking, what am I going to talk about? Because I'm like, we need to do this for Gabrielle, and we need to pay this. And, I want to work after I give birth, blah, 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 blah. And then it goes on and on and on. But those 3 things are actually things that we just talk about all the time. And it doesn't really get into this depth of a conversation because it's very surface level, like how much money do we need to be making to cover the bills, and how much and it's also very stressful conversations. When we take that out of the picture and we don't talk about money, we don't talk about work, and we don't talk about kids, we just talk about how things are between you and I, right? Between the husband and wife. How's your day going? How are you actually feeling? You can talk about religious things. You can talk about, an article that you read, or a research study that you spoke with a friend. Hopefully no lashon hara, but I'm just saying, like, there are other things that you can talk about aside from work and kids and money. And so those are the things usually that come up in a relationship, and you think like that's quality time, and it is sometimes, but you want to talk about other things that kind of like help elevate the soul. And that's why sometimes, like, I'll watch a shiur and be like, what do you think about this? I didn't really like that the rabbi said this. And then when we get into the conversation of why he agrees with the rabbi and I don't, then I kind of like dive deeper into how he thinks, and that helps me understand him more. So again, you're constantly growing with your partner, but you're also choosing not to talk about certain things in order to advance your emotional bond through other subjects, in order to have that deeper and not surface level emotional attachment. So remember, no talking about money, work, or kids. Try not to do that. I believe this is the last part, and then we'll go into the toolbox. Another part of the relationship. So first we spoke about how we're biologically and physically different. We spoke about how we need to set the ego aside. We need to know that we have to accept that we're constantly growing with each other. And this part is knowing how to deal with conflict. And that's one of the main differences between happily married couples and couples who aren't happily married. Because conflict is always going to arise no matter how perfect you are. And, there's some people who really think they're perfect and they're like, I don't need to change anything about me. And I'm like, that's amazing, but there's always going to be conflict. But the best way to tell if the couple is flourishing, I can probably, if I see like a couple fighting and I just see like how they're arguing, you can probably tell if they're a successful couple or not, just based on how they're arguing. If they're arguing and they're cursing at each other, there's a lot of work to be done there, right? Because I can't even say shut up to my husband. So I know that we're getting somewhere. But if someone's like, you piece of this, and you're discussing it, that's like already almost, I want to say verbally abusive, right? So when you know how to deal with conflict and you're not just like throwing things at each other, like you're getting somewhere, you're building an actual foundation. There are couples who fight until they run out of gas. And now, especially couples who don't have religion, what happens is it's a vicious circle. So they'll fight and they don't have conflict resolution, right? They don't have the right strategies or tools to deal with conflict. And so what do? They just argue and argue and argue and shut up and I hate you and I can't stand you. And I was waiting for you yesterday until 3 a.m, blah, blah, blah. And you just continue until you run out of gas. You probably go to sleep really pissed. The next day you make up in the bedroom, most probably if you're not religious, and you make up physically, and that's that. But what happens? You didn't resolve the conflict. You resolved it physically, but the conflict requires a lot more than, what's going on physically. You have to resolve it mentally and see actually how you're going to handle this in the future. And so what happens is that the conflict keeps arising, and then you keep just solving it physically and not mentally. And so knowing how to deal with conflict is not like fighting and cursing each other and then, sleeping together and then it's over. Because that happens a lot with non-religious couples, and they think like that's how they deal with conflict. But the real way to deal with conflict is, okay, let's calm down. When I get angry at something, I'm like, give me like 10 minutes and I'll get back to you. And so my husband is a Pisces, and Pisces are very like confrontational. They need to resolve ASAP. I'm like, give me 10 minutes, like set a timer. I don't care. Just 10 minutes. I need to because if I'm angry and I'm talking, it's not going to resolve anything. I'm just going to be like, you did this and you did that. And it's more like pointing fingers and not like trying to resolve the conflict. So whatever you need to do, whatever your personality is, and you really need to know yourself of how you deal with conflict. But I'm very like, okay, I need my space. Give me like 10 minutes to just like do some yoga or something, or meditate, or just like talk to myself. And then like, I'll get back to you. And so I'm like, this thing is falling off. Sorry. So I do that, and that usually works. And he's like, okay, like fine, take 10 minutes. And then I come back and I'm like, how can I help you? And then we, start talking about the issue, and everything's fine. And we're able to deal with it. It's very hard to do that because there are some people who are just angry and they don't need 10 minutes. They need like 3 months. No, I'm kidding. Like they need like maybe like a few hours. They need to sleep it off. Some people have that like thing that, you don't go to sleep until you resolve the conflict. And some people are like, it's better for me to sleep it off, and then like in the morning I'll be fine. So everyone's very different. But knowing yourself, your personality, and your ability to deal with the conflict, it's very, very important because we're all very different. And so some people, even when they're angry, they know how to keep their calm, and some people need 10 minutes. Some people need longer. Some people, are like, I need to go take a walk for an hour and just like, let me breathe. Everyone's different. There's no right or wrong here. It's just as long as you're not throwing things at each other and you're not, cursing each other out, and you're sitting down and having the conversation and you're communicating about the issue that you're having, that's the right beginning, at least, to resolving conflict. And this also goes back, by the way, to letting go of the ego, because somebody who has an ego says, I'm right and you're wrong, and leave me alone and I'm going to sleep. Versus, okay, I may be wrong in this situation. Let's sit down. Like, tell me how you saw the situation. Why did you see it that way? How come you think you're right? And then you go from there. It's very hard to build that type of tolerance. Some people are not tolerant like that, but it's constant work on both ends when it comes to conflict resolution. It's not just like I'm always going to be the one coming and saying, okay, what's wrong this time? Because that also, you run out of fuel, you're tired. So your husband also needs to work on the fact that, you need to be confrontational, sit down, have a good conversation. Do not have a conversation when you're angry, when you're hangry, when you're, hungry and you're grab a bar or have dinner and then talk it over. You want to make sure that you're in the best settings that you possibly could be, and it's the right timing to have that conflict resolution. And by the right timing, I mean not when he comes home and he's like overwhelmed and he's really angry, or he's on the phone with someone, you're like, you need to hang up, we need to have a conversation. Like, don't do that. Like, wait until he's more cooled down and then, go from there. So know the right timing. Where are we on time? Okay, perfect. Statistically, when we look at divorces, does anyone know the divorce rate nowadays? It's 50. Yes. Hopefully it won't be 75, but right now it's at 50%. So the other 50% that's married, do you know what percentage is happily married? There was another shield and they were like 2%. I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're so negative. It's like nobody wants to get married now. 50%. So it's not bad, but it's not the best. So that means 25% of all marriages are happy. So it's not the best statistics, right? So the odds are against us. So for those of you who are getting married, I swear it's an amazing blessing, but it's just a lot of work, and we just need to know how to handle it. And for those of you who are married, you already know what I'm talking about. So how do you not fall into the negative statistic? It's hard. It's very, very hard because there's so many, again, we spoke about the web of factors that contribute to marriage. And sometimes it's not even in our control, right? We have the media, we have the biological genetic differences. There are so many things that can happen. And so there are things that, we need to work on that is in our control, that can help, make us successful in our marriage. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. So for those of you who are not married, this is what you should look for the next time you go on a date with someone. Like, don't go carrying a list and be like, okay, not like that. Just have those questions, in your head, and make sure that you're on the same page. So I'm going to talk about that. But for those of you who are married, whatever you answer to those questions, that's what you'll need to work on. Okay? So, number 1, do you have the same goals? I know this is super cliche, but you have to really dig deep into what your goals are. So, we're talking about meaningful goals, like not how many kids do you want to have, but what values do you want to instill in your kids? What type of school do you want to send your kids to? How religious do you want your kids to be? What type of education do you want to give them? How strict are you going to be in terms of religion or timeout, or what's your sort of punishment? Like, are you going to put them in a corner for timeout? Are you going to, all of those things need to be in line, because when you get married and then suddenly you're like, we never agreed to put him in a yeshiva, or we never agreed to. So all of those things need to be handled before you go out into the real world, which is marriage. And then it's like, okay, I can't go back now, I married him. Like, you have to really be on the same page in terms of goals. Also, not only what does our home look like, where you want to live, I want to live in Sunny Isles in a villa, like not just that, which is surface level conversation. We're talking about, what does your house feel like? Does your husband want to keep Shabbat? Does he like the smell of cooking on right before Shabbat? Does he want you to light the candles before Shabbat? Does he want you to cover your hair Friday night? All of those things are very important conversations that we turn from surface level of what does it look like? Do you want wooden floors? Versus what do you want your house to feel like? Notice that you can't answer the question of what are your goals if you don't know yourself. So if you're not married yet and you're concerned with the fact that you don't even know what your goals are, then you definitely need to have that in check before you go and seek someone that's like you. Because what does that mean? You're like me, right? What are your real goals in life? Take a paper, write down, what do you want your house to look like? What do you want your house to feel like? What type of qualities are you looking for in your husband? All of those things need to be established before you go out and you date someone and you say, okay, these are my goals. Do you even know what your goals are? So it's very, very important that you reflect on yourself first and say, okay, these are my goals. Let me find someone that's in line with those values. Okay, so that was question one. Do you have the same goals? Number two, are you physically attracted to each other? So it's very, very interesting that in the Torah, they say that when you are doing a shidduch, so you need to be attracted to the person. So some people, when we look at like, it reminds me of that show, the new show, My Unorthodox Life. Oh my God, I'm like shocked that this is even on air, but either way, so there's like a really big misconception that people who have shidduchim, who do shidduchim now, they don't like need to be like attracted to the person. They're just like, okay, yalla, I need to get married. Like I'm 18, like I need to like be in the chuppah. It's not true. The Torah says you need to be attracted to the person, but the attraction is different than what we think. It's not like, oh my God, I have butterflies in my stomach. I'm about to like go for ice cream with this person. It's not that. It's more, wow, I really like his smile. Wow, I really like how he looks. But not just, oh my God, he's so hot, I can't breathe. Not like that. Because that goes away. Like after a year of marriage, the physical, the whole, oh my God, he's so gorgeous and everyone looks at him when I'm walking around with him. Like that goes away, the physical goes away. And so what I mean by attracted is you admire him, so it's not just the physical traits, but just his personality in general. So you have to be attracted to all of that. Now, attraction means you can kiss him. You're not going to be like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up. Not like that. And you can't be repelled by him. So you have to find that middle ground, because if it's too much passion and you're only just thinking about the physical, that's also not good. So you have to find that middle line where it's like, I'm attracted to him. Like, I don't mind kissing him, but you're not like, oh my God, I can't look at this person anymore. Right. That's horrible. And I hope that people don't do shidduchim like that. And they're like, oh my God, I need to get married. Like I need to, and they just go ahead with it. Like it's important that there's no pressure here. The Torah says you really need to find someone that you're actually attracted to. And the third question, do you respect them? That's a big one. Because if you are dating someone and you're like, yeah, like he's a janitor, like I'm not really into it, you don't respect his work, or you don't respect what he does out in the real world, or you don't respect the job that he has, then what happens? It's going to be hard to respect him in the future. So you want to make sure that you respect them, meaning that you admire what they do, you admire their values, you admire the family, you look at all of those things. So we said, do you have the same goals? Are you physically attracted to them? And also, do you respect them in a way that you're able to look at him and admire what he does and say, okay, this is what I want my husband to be. I'm going to look at him every day and be like, wow, I'm so proud of him. It's very, very important. It's very, very important that you admire your husband and what he does, because at the end of the day, if he comes home one day and you're like, and you don't give him the respect that he deserves. A man, by the way, everything is respect for a man. Like that's all they care about. So a man needs to be respected and wants to be loved, but a woman needs to be loved but wants to be respected. So always remember that. That's very important, because I'm going to give you an example. Like if your husband comes home from work and you're on the phone with someone and you're having like a really fun conversation with a friend, and your husband walks in. So there are two different scenarios. So one person will say, they'll continue the conversation and not even acknowledge that he walked in the door. And in another scenario, the woman will be like, hey, like I gotta call you back. Like my husband just walked in. What does that do automatically? The husband feels this like warmth in his heart. Like, wow, like she really respects me and she admires me and she thinks that I'm important. That's so important for a man, because you're giving him his place in the home. He's the king of the castle, right? You're building a castle in your home, essentially. And by the way, there's a pasuk in the Torah that says, "Ubanu li mikdash v'shachanti betucham." And so it means Hashem says, and build me a temple and I will dwell in you. And a woman's obligation, a woman's role in a relationship, but especially when it comes to marriage, is to build a temple and build a home where there is a Shekhinah, where Hashem dwells in it. And what does that mean? Keeping the mitzvot, but most importantly, respecting the husband and giving him the place in the home. Because no matter what he does, and that's why I said it's very important to admire and respect him, no matter what he does, he needs his place in the home. You want to feel like you have someone that really supports you, that you feel safe with them and you trust them, and that at the end of the day, he comes home and, he's able to support you guys financially and all of those things. And so that's why it's really important to admire them, because then it makes it easier to respect them. And it makes it easier to say, hey, I got to call you back. My husband just got home from work. I'll never forget when I was living in Israel, I was doing shurim with a rabbanit. And I walked in one time. No, I called her. Sorry, I was in Jerusalem, and I called her and I said, I'm coming. I'm in Jerusalem. And she said, there's a window during the day between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. where I'm with my husband. Meaning, like, nobody can knock on the door, like nobody comes in. Even my kids who are in yeshivot who come for lunch, like, they know they cannot come from 1 to 3. So they either come before 1 o'clock or after 3 o'clock, because that's like where my husband's presence is, and that's where my husband is a king in his castle, right? And so what does that make the husband feel? Like, wow, like she really respects me. The children don't come first, the husband comes first. Really, like, for the, low key, the kids are obviously very important, but when you give your husband that place and he feels respected, it's literally the foundation of Shalom Bayit. And the same thing for a woman. A woman needs to feel loved. So when a husband buys her jewelry and he takes her out and he gives her compliments, that's where the Shalom Bayit is at. And that's how you build it. It's very simple. Simple, but not. So let's get into the toolbox. We're running out of time almost. There are a few things that you want to do. So whether you're married or not, and you're handling a relationship, or you are married with kids, whatever it is, this applies to most people. Better and more effective communication. Don't be afraid of confrontation. If it means you have to sit down and talk, don't be afraid of it, because at the end of the day, it's your partner for life. You're building a relationship with them and you're trying to figure out, what is the best way to resolve the conflict. So you want to have better and more effective communication, and that means exploring more. Ask more questions. How come you feel this way about that? How come you don't like that I did this? Is it because when you were younger, or is it because your father's like this or your mother's like this? When you understand a little bit more, then the next time that you do it, you're going to think twice, because now you understand where it stems from. So you want to always explore, have exploration questions, make sure that you have better communication with your spouse, your boyfriend, or your husband. Uninterrupted quality time, like we said, very, very important. Try to have 20 to 30 minutes of it a day. No Netflix and chill, no phones, no kids, like literally no one, just conversation. Learn to let go of the ego by picking your battles. Like we said, would you rather be loved or would you rather be right? Or would you rather be right or would you rather be loved? I feel like that sounds better. Date night once a week, that's very important. And I know that we're all super busy and stressed and this, and we have stuff to do, but really it's so important to really find, one time during the week where it's like, okay, it's us time, and it's getting out of the house, getting dressed, putting makeup on. That's very important, because especially now everyone's like working from home and Corona and this, we don't really like get out much. So it's very, very important that, we establish that we have date night. Working on Nida and family purity. So I didn't really mention so many religious laws, and we'll get into that in another shiur, which will be part 2. But Nida and Taharat HaMishpacha is extremely, extremely important, because it's the best way, number one, to incorporate Hashem in your marriage. But it's also to keep the attraction going, because how Nida functions is that you have the 2 weeks during the month where you go to the mikveh, and your husband can't touch you, and you're completely, you have your me time, right? You have to be separated from your husband. But again, it keeps the flame going. It keeps all of that importance of Shalom Bayit and the physical attraction going, because it's like I said, the first year it's like you're attracted, whatever, and then after it kind of like dies down, but it keeps the flame going, because again and again, 2 weeks out of the month, you're not allowed to touch your husband. So that creates the flame once again. So you want to definitely make sure that mitzvah is definitely incorporated in your marriage, because every mitzvah, by the way, like covering your hair protects your children, the nidah protects your home. And so making sure that you incorporate Hashem in your life, especially when you're building a temple for him, that he dwells in it always, and that's by including Taharat HaMishpacha and by including Nidah. Another thing is you want to be patient, because the learning process is just, it's very long. And so, you might be like, oh, I'm so proud of myself. Like I let my ego go today. Like that's it. It's gonna, we're never gonna fight for the rest of the year. The fight's gonna come up, in 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. And so if you have the patience to continue growing, even if you don't see the results right away, that's where Shalom Bayit comes in. You have to be able to be patient to see the results, and to be patient and work on yourself also, and not just point fingers and be like, oh, he's not working as hard as me in my personality or in getting better, because everybody, some people take longer than usual. And so focus on yourself, but also be very patient with yourself and with your spouse. Last thing is you want to give compliments, constantly give compliments. It's so important. And even the smallest things, like today, my mother-in-law came to, she's watching him right now, my son, and I didn't have time to clean the floors. There was like broccoli everywhere because Gabriel just decided to have like a food fight. I don't know. And I was like, there's broccoli on the floor and your mom's coming. What am I going to do? And I was like, and I have to get ready. So I was like, can you please mop the floor? And he's like, yeah, like no problem, And so he did it. And I said, and in the car I said, thank you so much. I love you so much. Thank you for cleaning the floors. He's like, stop, like you sound so corny. I'm like, no, but it's important for me to know, like, thank you so much. Like, it was like a big deal. Like, I really like didn't have time. And like, you were like, of course, like I'll wash the floors. Cause some husbands are like, oh, we'll do it later, and he was very like, I got you, like go get ready in the bathroom and I'll clean the floors. And so it's very, very important to compliment, even if it sounds corny and you're like, the husband's like, oh, I'm about to throw up from like that compliment. You still want to do it often, because even if they're like, ugh, like stop talking like that, they actually enjoy it. And the same thing for a wife, when they're like, oh, you look pretty. I'm like, you always say that. He's like, no, like you actually look pretty, but if that happens if he tells you every day you're pretty, it's like, okay, stop. Like you don't want to like say the same compliment every day. So like try to, kind of like say different things on like maybe twice a week, 3 times a week. But at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that you're complimenting all the time. That creates such a positive energy in the home. And even if you're fighting and it's like imagine you're in the middle of fighting, it's like, you're like so pretty. You're like, what? But complimenting is really everything. It's very, very important, especially for the woman more than the man. And imagine 20 years from now, he says, wow, you look really beautiful. You're like, oh, I still got this. It's hard because a woman always wants to feel pretty. And after 20 years, you're like, he probably doesn't even love me anymore, but he doesn't want to say it. And then he just like compliment right there. Like, you're so pretty. It's like, wow, like it really always like replenishes that love that you have for each other. So you definitely want to continue complimenting always. Okay. Like I never wearing this again. But do you guys have any questions? No? Okay. Any questions here on Zoom? I'm just going to look at the chat. Okay, the chat's not like letting me. Okay, perfect. Sorry guys, just checking something. Okay, building an emotional bond when single. Okay, so someone's asking, how do you build an emotional bond when you're single or on a date? So like I mentioned with the 3 questions about, setting the right goals and knowing, where you're headed. So asking the right questions. So it's not just like, oh, where would you want to live? Like, do you like sunny isles? It's more like, what does your home feel like? Where do you come from? How did your parents raise you? More on like the religious level, like, do you go to shul once a week, twice a week? You want to make sure that you're asking specific questions, and that just, that really reinforces, what you're looking for, and seeing if the other side, based on the responses, it wants the same thing. That's how you build the emotional bond, because then you get to know each other a little bit better. Hopefully that answered your question. Let me see if there's any other things. Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna close this now. Okay, perfect. Okay, guys, thanks for joining us on Zoom. I'm just gonna turn this off.